From the 50s to the late 80s, Boston had a vibrant gay club scene. At some points, there were up to 30 gay bars going on at one time in the Boston area. One stood out from the rest.
I think everybody came to the 12 first. They had to. They had to see what it was like because everybody talked about it.
We had people from all over the world. The 12 had it all.
You went there if you were celebrating and having a big night. You went there if you were totally alone and couldn't find any friends.
I do talk to kids a lot who keep saying, oh, I wish, I could go back then. A lot of fun.
It, in a lot of ways, was the center of gay nightlife and gay life. I miss it. I still miss it to this day because you just don't have anything like that.
It was fabulous.
It was everything to everybody.
There really isn't a club today that is like it. You could go in and dance and drink, and we had an outdoor roof deck that you could go enjoy yourself at. You could go downstairs and shoot pool.
$12.70 was a laundromat. People used to come there and do their clothes and have a few beers. I mean, what a wonderful idea.
I know Bob White was the foundation for that bar. And of course, I think he was the foundation for a lot of the bars in the city. He kind of set the precedent.
Bob White, who originally opened the club, died of carbon monoxide poisoning. It was kind of suspicious circumstances. He ran the club in the 1970s, and he went home one night with a couple of drag queens, and apparently the story is that he had left the car running, but in the process of leaving the car running, managed to get into his house and lock the door and get upstairs in bed with his two drag queens. The rumors were that he was taken care of because they wanted him out of the bar scene.
That time, the restrictions on drinking was almost never done.
We were told to let certain people in without doing proper ID checks.
I carded people if I felt that they were underage, if they didn't have their license.
Because it was in '86, because I was 16.
I was 13 years old. I was a kid.
I was only 16, 17 at the time.
Governor King kept changing the drinking age, so one minute I was legal, the next minute I wasn't legal.
I've heard a lot of stories about people being underage, paying off the police, a lot of that. I never saw any of it.
Nowadays, it's not uncommon for kids to come out during high school, but in those days it was still pretty radical. Sometimes we would hang out in front of the 1270 or the Ramrod, just waiting for cute guys to come out and take a shine to us. And I was at a party in Lowell with some of my friends from the university. We'd just been hanging out drinking, and someone got the impulse to go to the 12. And then eventually got a fake ID from one of my friends at New Lowell. And what's interesting about that is it was a woman. She was a lesbian, and I'm 5'8", she was about 6'2". But she had an androgynous sounding German name. It was Kirsten. And I guess that's all that really mattered. I was such a Twinkie. I was 16 and I must have looked like I was 12, So I was, chicken hawk's delight. It was amazing. People wanted to buy me drinks, they wanted my phone number, and I can't remember. It's been decades since someone's wanted to buy me a drink in this town. I mean, the fact that they let me in at 16 demonstrates how non-discriminating the place was. You know, just it was like all walks of life. Yet when it came to things like public sex, it was still a very, you know, puritanical New England kind of attitude. And there were some guys who were really unabashed about it, and you would see them leave the club and go right over to the park, and other queens would immediately start gossiping about them. And, you know, there was this sort of boys in the band kind of ethos, you know. I was always amazed too at, you know, the variety of guys who would go over to the bushes, you know. I mean, you know, leather guys to total preps, you know, didn't matter. In those days, just being openly gay itself was almost synonymous with being a sex radical.
In the beginning, you know, everybody's just kind of getting warmed up and sitting around and checking out who's around and gossiping. And then come 11:30, it's like a bus pulls up.
I don't think anybody ever walked through the front door and didn't have a good time.
Typical night was usually started in the early evening or in the daytime where, of course, I would have to figure out, okay, what are you going to wear tonight?
A lot of printing before you go, because you got to remember this was 79, 84 was my era, and everybody wore cologne, and it stunk.
Usually the first thing was getting on the dance floor at some point to sort of loosen up.
Not too many people went by themselves.
It was also a time where this little clique and that little clique would see you show up each night that you came, and then they started to want to know you as well. So, you know, you might have started going with one or two friends, and then by the end of the night, you know, you were saying goodbye each week to 20 or 30 people.
They had live bands, they had DJs, they had, on Sunday nights, they had a trivia night.
There was a straight invasion, and it was all fat girls in high heels tripping on the stairs.
And you'd go downstairs, and each floor was entered through a stairway, and it was just as you came down the stairs, it was always packed.
There was these like narrow stairways, I mean, breaking every fire code possible.
It would take you a minute or two to get to the next floor.
And it'd be like two rows of people, one going up the stairs, the other one going down the stairs. And if two queens wanted to chit-chat about something, it would hold up the even flow of the whole place.
The next floor was packed, and it was a line out the door, people waiting to get in.
And then you party for a while, and then you chill out on the roof after you're soaking wet from dancing. You chill out on the rooftop.
In the beginning, they were giving out tickets. You'd get cover charge, would give you two drink tickets.
You went in, you paid your admission, but it got you a ticket for two drinks. And I thought that was the coolest thing. You really hooked up with your friends to go in together and maybe leave together because you needed a ride or something. And you really probably didn't hang out with them the whole time. And there were some nights there were no women there at all, and there were some nights there'd be a bunch. And they were really like the women you came in with and one other small crowd of women that came together. That's pretty much how it went. There were a few women's bars. I'd have to say they weren't as much fun and as flashy. You went there and you met women and you could talk and everything, and it was great to have them. But if you wanted to dance and sweat, you know, it was 12-7. I just got older, and I just, and you know, women my age started having things in their houses. And the music was great. I always headed straight up to the third floor, dance all night. Sometimes you'd think it really kind of like a little pizzazz, or a place where people are almost naked, people are caught in back rooms with it. You know, I didn't hear too much of that. I would fall into that thing in the beginning of the night, going, let's not go there, we're always there, let's go somewhere splashy, no. So, yeah, we used to cut it down sometimes on account of that, but it was what it was.
The 1270 was a safe haven to many of the clients at a time where gay people were still mostly hidden from society and attacked in public.
I remember the first time I did anything gay is I worked at a drugstore when I was a teenager, and I saw the Boston Phoenix, and I saw something in the personal that said GWM, and I didn't know what it stood for. I said, hopefully it stands for gay white male, and I answered that. So I didn't know anything about the bars or anything like that. I didn't really hit the gay clubs until 1980. I was dealing with a lot of family issues. I moved out of my parents' home, And I was kind of wandering between my grandparents' home and another home and going to college. I loved, like, it was Thursday and Sunday, they had 2-for-1. Being the accountant that I am, I love day of deals. So to me, 2-for-1 beers were great. I had met so many friends there. These friends are still my friends 25 years later. I have a lot of very close friends that I met there. And it was a family. When the 1270 was around, it was much more of a, let's go out and see my friends and let's have a couple of drinks, but let's dance. Let's just enjoy our life, because if we didn't have all the other avenues that the kids today have. That going to the club was very exciting because of the music and the people, and I'd meet my friends there every weekend. We would go at least 2 nights of the weekend, usually Thursday or Saturday. It was just a whole social life that I didn't have. Back then, the bars were really the only place we could all go to not feel alone. I smell hamburgers to this day, and I think of the barbecue grill that they had at the very end of the rooftop deck, and the whole place was lit up because Fenway Park there's a baseball game at Fenway Park, and just the excitement of knowing you're across the street from thousands and thousands of baseball fans, great people, and you're having a party on a roof and you're eating a hamburger and no one's bothering you. It was just a great feeling.
Well, I lived over on Park Drive, and my person that I was going with at the time, she apparently knew about it, and we immediately took to the place. Bob White was there. It was just a great place. Double pool tables, great drinks. I had nothing else to do at the time. The firm I worked for had moved to New York, so I just became a full-fledged bartender. I was a bartender at the 1270 from 1978 to 1983. I am kind of like a sister, a friend, a mother, one of these types. And this is how, I guess, it became accepted. It's my customers, they loved it. And they loved it when I followed them too. And I had one guy, Larry, had rum and coke, and got to the point where Larry used to drive his car into the Fans River. And so one night he was in the bar, and he had sworn that he had given up and was just drinking coke. So I'm go upstairs, and I said, I'll bet you went upstairs to get a drink. He's going to go back down here. He's going to think I would be foolish, not know what he was doing. He was drinking. I got his car keys, and guess what? Didn't end up at the fence. It wasn't my livelihood. And I think that probably made it a lot more comfortable for me, because you can get tight with a situation, and maybe a customer, and you really don't want to do it today because you'd rather be doing something else. But for me, it was like a hobby. I found it light, even though it had its dark, sides and difficulties. I found it very light. Bunches of us would get together. We would meet, play pool at the 1270 from 1 in the afternoon till 1 in the morning. We'd eat the hot dogs, the hamburgers. It was our home. I walked in the ladies' room one time, and there was a couple of guys in there with a couple of girls, and I looked down on the sink, and I thought, I bet you that isn't flour. And I thought, guys, what are we doing here? And they looked at me like I'm stupid. And so I just went over and I went, and there it goes. And then I had them thrown out. And of course, security at the end of the night made sure I got to my car. I like the boiler room, as they called it. Basically, just had the pool tables. Although I liked dancing on the disco floor on the 3rd floor. It would get so crowded you couldn't find a spot.
It was no secret that many Boston bars were unofficially segregated between black and white customers at the time, but not at the 12.
I used to go there and see my neighbors and my friends white trooper, not gay.
We didn't discriminate by race or color.
And I asked one of them, and he said, well, they don't let us in those friends.
It's no secret during that time for a lot of the people that went to these clubs to be stopped at the door with a group of people and be told, well, do you have 3 IDs? They knew they didn't have 3, but they really didn't want them in.
They weren't allowed in the bars in Kenmore Square.
We had a section of the club where disco floor, in fact, there was seating, and a lot of the blacks from the Boston community felt comfortable coming into the club and sitting there.
they just danced the night away, just like everyone else. You know, they were there to do the same thing.
I think within the community, people just knew that, you know, there was a lot of hate and problems in the world. And when you came to the 1270, you really wanted to sort of put that behind you and enjoy the evening.
Because in general, when you're an outcast, you're an outcast. It doesn't really matter what the basis is.
The time I was going to the 12, I was working in the shipping department of a fat lady store called Roman's on Winter Street in downtown Boston. Most of the muumuus for the larger women, I actually could turn into clothing for myself, including pants and shirts and tops, and actually it gave me a lot of ideas. The club scene in Boston was really great at that time because that sense of community that we keep hearing, you know, so much about was truly evident. Back in the days, it was just, you know, a bar or a room, because you really did have kids like myself who were going to high school in a very hostile environment that on different nights could collect at these nightclubs. If you were at that point, you know, a punk rocker or a woman or a person of color, and you just like didn't fit in, or you were a little bit more freakish and that kind of thing, they really opened their arms. I actually formed my own band. I had always wanted to really you know, play in my kind of my home base, which was, you know, more of a gay crowd and things like that. And one of the great things about the 1270 was they saw punk and new wave music coming on the scene in a way that there was a major interest in it. And this sort of opened a door for people to approach them about having live music. And as a musician, it was great to finally not just go and be dancing at the clubs, but actually be able to perform it. And also seeing other bands that had gay members or whatnot on the scene all being able to play at the 12. They had a Wednesday night rock night. I did love the fact that in the old days, they used to have dance contests when the 70s were merging into the 80s. You had to partner off. And most of the people that would enter would be gay men who would bring, you know, a woman with them. And I remembered me and my friend entering, and we were men. And I'll never forget several of the dance contests. We were the only two, you know, gay men who had entered as a couple to, you know, do the hustle or do this or do that, because they would have these dance contests. We won, I think, third prize one night, you know, which was like fun. I think it was $200 or whatever. I loved the basement. If it was a Saturday night, I'd been there for several hours dancing and sort of drinking, and definitely had kind of run out of speed a bit. I would head down to the basement, and they used to have a grill in the basement and a jukebox, and I would go downstairs, order a cheeseburger, and you know, sit down, drop a quarter in the jukebox, and play Brenda Lee singing "I'm Sorry" while I had my burger, and then I was fine, and then I would sort of return upstairs and continue dancing till the end of the night. No money, but lots of excitement and enthusiasm for, you know, the club scene.
I would say that the 1270 was probably the most diverse group of people.
Some of the people that were there were crazy.
The amount of artists and gay people and transsexuals and freaks and, you know, you name it.
You would have the really big disco in the middle floor. People would be coming in and, you know, dressed appropriately for that.
April Bellini, who was another pal from Everett, who also at that time was one of the only transgendered people that I had known. And this was, you know, 1975.
Everybody was regular because everybody lived there.
David Nicholas, who's an esthetician and makeup artist now, came from Somerville.
Joe didn't like having drag queens. There were some there.
Frank Ganchi. How do you go from being a bouncer in a gay bar to a multi-millionaire?
There was a gentleman who came with a case of records, vinyl, 12-inch vinyl records, and he'd pull them out, and he'd sit on the steps there on the very back end of the bar where the mirrors were. He'd sat there, and he would pull out two records and pretend he was spinning.
John, Pat, and Carol, which is how we kind of knew them. Back in the day, you didn't always know people's last name.
Lewis was a big black guy. He was a bouncer. And then all of a sudden, decided to put a wig on and have a personality of Nancy Sinatra.
This guy Billy used to drive up from Milton.
The other had this tambourine man who had the tambourine all the time, and he was like going away.
And you would have downstairs sort of a lounge group of people. You'd have middle age, but you had people of all races, colors, ages, all coming in and out of the front door.
You know, you had your Twinkies, you had your old creeps, you had your party boys, you had your new wave kids.
There's, you know, several of those people that are still close that I've known that I still do things with today.
We had Dr. Wang's daughter in one night, and her security team arrived on site with guns looking for her.
Very little of the leather community ever came in their leather.
Sadly, several of the people, you know, aren't here anymore, who died of AIDS very early on in the 80s and didn't get to sort of see where things went.
I had a friend named Abby Levine, and she's gone now. She had breast cancer. Yeah, I saw a couple famous people there, but I can't really talk about it. Duck Magnum, duck!
I love the fights. There were always fights in the
So there'd be those typical rivalry jealousies that would spar or pick a fight that periodically that I recall.
There'd be like lesbians beating up straight men, and lesbians beating up lesbians, and gay men beating up lesbians, and it was just, you never knew what was going to happen out there.
The customers, you know, they would get in fights amongst themselves, and you know, you'd have to interject yourself sometimes and take one aside and say, you know, you don't pull out.
We had so many people with so many different ideologies and so many different concepts of what it was that they wanted to get out of 1270.
The 12, they really were promoting a mix. They wanted mixed, and to me, a mixed club does a lot better. It's just a healthier thing.
When they played Last Dance, you're supposed to know to finish your drink and go, but we never did. Then they would turn on the lights and they would say, okay, everybody, you got to go home. It's close and get out. Go ahead. And we still didn't go. And then they had Walter, and he was big and strong, and he'd pick people up like this. When I need to take us out the door.
Bruce worked in security at the 12 for 10 years. The club got a reputation for being very aggressive with troublesome customers.
I was working across the river campus for Don Holland, and it was not so much high pressure as it was rigid. And my friend Kelly Cameron had just started working at 1270. He said, well, why don't you come over here? The 1270 owned two clubs, as a matter of fact. They owned Sporters and they owned the 1270. So once we started working at 1270, we were walking with Sporters, and we got discounts on drinks at Sporters if you went to Sporters. And that was kind of a fun experience because you could have your cake and eat it too. We had a reputation for beating up the clientele, not throwing them out, beating them up. One of the security guys, Black Walter, had to be let go from the security staff because he messed up one guy so bad that he sued the club and had to have plastic surgery. Joe McGowan decided that he was going to put in a policy of no high heels. Well, we got called to task on that by the Liquor Commission. If you were a straight woman, so to speak, in heels with your straight man, chances are you'd get out of the door and denied access for one reason or another. The male security guys would go up to the guys and hit on them. The girls would go up to the girls and hit on them to see what kind of a reaction we got. And that way we could weed out the undesirable people. I saw a guy pull a bottle out from behind one of the bars, and I watched him do it and put it under his jacket, and I went over and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hi, what you doing there?" And we come down the bottom of the stairs, and Kevin just threw him against the door. 2 seconds later, the door opens up, and he's standing there with a knife, and he comes lunging at Kevin. And Kevin and I are both standing there watching this guy lunge, and Kevin yells out, "It's okay, you can stay." Kevin had the foresight to go to the other door to grab a baseball bat. Kevin and I pursued him outside the club, all the way up to Peterborough Street. He stopped, grabbed a woman by from behind, put the knife up to her throat. He said, "If you come near me, I'll cut her fucking throat." I looked down the street to my right and I saw the police coming, but somebody called the cops. So Kevin threw the bat in the bushes, and the guy threw the knife in the bushes. And the next thing you know, the police are there. The police are advising us what not to do, telling us that this guy was wanted in New York City.
The mix and variety of music was the reason for a night at the 1270.
New wave on the first floor, and then you had this classic disco stuff.
So you'd be dancing to Madonna.
Dancing Queen. That was my favorite song.
Lisa and Paul Jam was really big.
Carol Douglas was singing their doctor's orders one night.
School favorites. What were they? You know, Vicky Sue Robinson and Sylvester Jones.
Dream on Funk by Sylvester.
Jet Boy Jet Girl, El Montello, B-52.
I love the album group. You know,
Like the first song I ever heard from them, it was Carlos and Seal by the Go-Go's.
You would hear the Go-Go's. You would hear all these groups for the first time.
You can always count on them playing Last Dance at the end of the night.
The Open the Rooftop theme song was the Screams of the Water Touring.
There were songs in the old days that had a narrative.
The best in dance and classic disco music.
was by Lost. That was a big thing.
I love the DJ. I thought it was just adorable.
And our DJs were the best. Dana and Wendy and Peter. Debbie, great DJs.
Patrick was one of the customers that transitioned to working there over the years.
I lived in Connecticut, and a couple of times when I was up here visiting, I had some friends that brought me there. And then after moving up here, I had remembered it so clearly because I had such an eclectic group of friends that I felt that this was the one place that we could all go to and meet. And after going to the 1270 for a few weeks, I said, well, I just happened to be there at the right time, and they were looking for bar backs. So I actually applied. So I sort of went from being a customer to immediately being an employee. I worked there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, constantly there. I knew a lot of people as a bartender, as Heineken, gin and tonic. People would be, hey, Patrick, I'd go to another club. They'd be like, there's Patrick from the 12. It was like you were a mini celebrity within the club scene. But I never could say, hey, Heineken, because I didn't know their name. We had sports and so forth. And I had been a diver for 5 years through high school in my hometown in high school. I played many years of tennis and I competed. But I never really got a true sense of being a competitor until I'd come to the 12 and had the opportunity to play on the pool team. I was bartending one afternoon and I got the opportunity because someone didn't show up. I now know, even though I don't play as much, that if you're going to beat me, you're going to beat me well, because I'm going to make, I can still play well enough that I'm not going to just lose. And I always tell people, you go up to shoot your shot, you're playing really good people. You may never get another shot, and life is so like that. Sometimes you just got to really put your best shot out there. We would close the door at 1:30, 2 o'clock, and everybody would, pretty much all of the guests would, the clients would leave, and we would stay there as a group. And, we would commiserate, we'd sit there and talk about, who came through the door, who is it, who is bar. And I think for me, that was great because, you're wound up, you've been pouring all night, you're zipping, you're ready to go. You needed really another hour or so with the doors closed. The management and the staff really were a family.
I would describe the 1270 to anybody that gave a shit. I would probably say a lot of people would come from far, far away. You'd see license plates from New Hampshire, Rhode Island. You'd see license plates from New York. The neighborhood was a giant rotary, so people could drive around and around and around these neighborhoods. I used to, I couldn't get in. I would hang around outside, and everybody was smoking weed outside and bring little nip bottles, and people would live at it. If it was open in the afternoons, we had drink specials. We had 2 for $1, and Mike Dawkins did away with that. Even the way it was stacked up with those many floors, and on the bottom floor they had a grill. Even on the top floor at nighttime they had a grill. There was a kitchen. You could live out of that place. You really could. There was a night for everything, and there were all kinds of people every night, and it was what you made. There's a scene on every floor. You could be a different person on every floor. There's that stupid thing in front of the 1270. It's still there. And there were all these queens that were either thrown out for doing drugs, or they were too boozed out, or they didn't have their ID, or they were just banned for bad behavior. So they would just hang out in front. And they would hang out on that wooden thing. It's like a fence. And there'd be so many people sitting on it, the thing would just collapse all of a sudden, and they'd be all just like sitting in mulch. The bad stories were that that's when drugs and AIDS were really big, cocaine, and people would die, and they wouldn't have long strung out illnesses for years. They would die immediately, and a few months later, gone. Nobody knew why. I think that contributed to a lot of the end of everything, and it killed off a generation. And a lot of young people don't know and don't remember or aren't even reminded of the good times and the diversity that clubs like the 1270 provided, because we don't have those people anymore, and we don't have that scene anymore. And it's very sad.
A lot of the bars were owned by either police or mafia people, because I went to a lot of bars that were open 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Rights that have been made to him for 1270, that he either had to pay or things would get difficult.
The 1270 made headlines and exposed corruption, but at the price of the owner closing the bar and leaving the state out of fear of reprisal.
All of a sudden, the owner just was up and out of town and missing.
A new dance bar opened in its place, Quest.
The genius of John Morocco really, they've tried in the later incarnation of that sort of 1270 feeling. Quest.
When it was nice out, it was open, it was fabulous. When it was going and it was great, it was popular. Quest was really, it was the new 1270. I don't know what the 1270 was like before, but Quest was, kind of glamorous and, funky, and, it was really, not intimidating.
Other clubs took over 1270 Boylston Street after Quest, but none really succeeded.
I thought the nightclub scene was asleep in the 90s, and I thought it had a bit of a pulse.
It was a part of a different era, I think, and all the people that frequented it were from a whole different era and culture. I think that it also had its issues. I think that it wasn't one major thing that contributed to it. I would have to say the last year or two that I did work there, it was very apparent that fewer people were coming, that they were trying to take some action to increase the client base.
I'm going to sound like an old loser saying, the internet ruined nightlife. Well, it did.
A lot of people could meet online. They didn't have to come to a club to meet anymore.
It was a Trojan horse. They went right in, they promoted the clubs, and they killed it.
I think that the concept could come back, but I think that for what the 1270 offered as a club back then would be a lot different today.
The club scene is sort of a shadow of what it used to be.
Boston moved on, and so did the space the 1270 occupied, becoming a sports bar for a few years until it closed as well. In 2020, the entire block was demolished, including not only the 12, but the gay bars Ramrod and Machine next door, leaving the Fenway and much of Boston with only a couple of gay bars to frequent. The 12 is now gone forever from the world, except in memory.
It is one of the clubs that I have such fond memories for, and I had such a good time there. And again, I love the disc jockeys that were there. I love the crowd. I love the vibe, and it was just a very special place.
But I can't say that I've ever found another one like that. It really was pretty extraordinary.
That found hope on that place, and I think if there were a place like that again, it would be extremely popular.
But given my perception on what the needs are, the entertainment needs are for the world today, I think the 1270 would have a hard time